Most people will never reach their potential, not because they lack talent, not because they lack opportunity, but because they keep waiting for permission, for the perfect moment, for someone to believe in them first. This book is not for those people. This book is for the ones who are done waiting, the ones who are ready to burn the excuses, silence the doubt, and become completely, utterly unstoppable. Let's begin. Chapter 1. You were never meant to be comfortable. It usually happens late. Not during the busy part of the day. Not when everyone else is watching. But sometime around 2 in the morning, when the noise drops. You lie there and think about the thing you know you should be doing. The move you keep delaying. The conversation you keep avoiding. The version of your life that exists just outside the one you're living. And then the familiar sentence appears. Maybe later. You turn the thought over once or twice. Find a reason that sounds responsible. Tell yourself the timing isn't right. And then the mind does what it always does. It protects you from discomfort. The strange part is that it feels intelligent when it happens. Logical. Measured. You tell yourself you're being careful, practical, sensible. But if you stay with that moment long enough, a quieter question appears. If comfort is helping you, why does it feel so much like standing still? Most people never ask that question. They spend years building a life that feels stable on the surface. Predictable routines. Manageable problems. Nothing too risky. But under the surface, something else grows. A quiet tension. Because the mind knows when it is avoiding something that matters. You can feel it in small ways. The hesitation before opening your laptop. The relief when a plan gets postponed. The strange fatigue that shows up around work that actually matters. You might tell yourself you're just tired. But fatigue is rarely the real reason. Avoidance is. Not loud avoidance. Not obvious. The sophisticated kind. The kind that dresses itself up as patience, or planning, or responsibility. You might recognize this. You say you want change. But the moment discomfort appears, you negotiate with it. Tomorrow instead of today. Later instead of now. The brain is very good at this. Because its first priority is not growth. Its first priority is safety. And comfort feels like safety. That's the hidden pattern. Your mind is not trying to make you successful. It is trying to keep you alive. Those are very different goals. And if this kind of thinking resonates with you, if you're the kind of person who actually sits with uncomfortable ideas instead of scrolling past them, then this channel is built for you. Quiet thinking, clear truths, no noise. So subscribe to Starbeam Audiobook. Not for motivation, for perspective. Now, back to the uncomfortable part. Consider something simple. A professional stays in the wrong job for 10 years. The work drains them. They know it. But the salary is stable. The routine is familiar. So they stay. Every year they promise themselves they will make a move. Next year. After this project. After the market improves. Comfort whispers reasonable things. And it whispers them for a very long time. Meanwhile, somewhere out there, another version of that same person exists. The version that took the risk. That version left earlier, learned faster, failed a few times, and eventually built a life the first one only imagines at 2 in the morning. Comfort did not protect the first person. It simply delayed their reckoning. Comfort is the enemy wearing a friendly face. That probably sounds harsh, but truth often does. Here is something worth noticing. Every meaningful change in your life started with discomfort. Think about it. A breakup forced you to grow. A failure pushed you to rethink something. A moment of embarrassment changed how you behaved. The growth never arrived before the discomfort. It arrived because of it. Pain has always been the signal. Discomfort is not the obstacle. It is the doorway. If it doesn't challenge you, it isn't changing you. And yet the mind continues trying to avoid it. You might even be doing it right now. You listen to ideas like this. You agree with them. But part of you quietly plans to apply them later. That is the mechanism. Understanding without movement. Knowledge without friction. It feels productive. But nothing actually changes. Actually, that's not quite it. Let me say that differently. It changes something very important. It strengthens the habit of avoidance. Every time you know the right action, and choose comfort instead, the brain records that pattern. Not as failure, as instruction. Next time becomes easier to avoid. And the time after that, easier still. Eventually the pattern becomes invisible. You no longer notice the moment you chose comfort. You simply experience the result. A life that feels smaller than it should. I remember a small detail from years ago. Nothing dramatic. Just a gym at the edge of town. Old equipment. Fluorescent lights that hummed constantly. There was a man who trained there every morning. Early. Before work. He never lifted the same weight twice. Every week, he added a little more. Sometimes it was barely noticeable. 2 kilograms. Maybe less. But he always added something. One morning someone asked him why. Why push the weight up every week? Why not stay where it feels manageable? He shrugged. Then said something simple. If the weight feels easy, I stayed too long. That sentence stuck with me. Because the principle was bigger than the gym. Growth does not happen where things stay comfortable. Athletes know this. If they train only within familiar limits, their bodies stop adapting. The muscles receive no signal to change. Life works the same way. If your decisions remain inside the border of comfort, your life eventually freezes there. The most dangerous place you can be is completely at ease. Because when nothing challenges you, nothing changes you. And when nothing changes you, time quietly moves forward anyway. Years pass. Opportunities close. And the discomfort you tried to avoid returns later in a different form. Regret. Regret is delayed discomfort. With interest, comfort is not rest. It is postponed suffering. You might disagree with that. Many people do. They say comfort means stability, security. But look closer. True stability does not come from avoiding challenge. It comes from knowing you can face it. That is a different kind of peace. The peace of capability. The peace of someone who has trained themselves to move toward hard things, not away from them. That shift is where everything changes. At some point you must stop treating discomfort like an emergency. It isn't. It is simply information. A signal that you are near something important. The mind says, step back. Growth says, step forward. You have a choice. Not a dramatic one. A quiet one. Usually invisible to everyone except you. The moment when effort appears, and comfort offers an exit. That moment decides more of your life than any grand plan ever will. Because life is rarely changed by huge leaps. It is shaped by small decisions repeated many times. Step toward discomfort, or step away. The unstoppable person is not fearless. That's a myth. They feel the same resistance everyone else does. The same hesitation. The same internal voice suggesting easier paths. The difference is simpler than people expect. They stopped negotiating with comfort. They treat difficulty like a requirement, not something to survive, something to seek, because they understand something most people never fully accept. Comfort always asks for payment later. Think again about the person lying awake at 2 in the morning. The one imagining the life they want. That life does not exist on the comfortable side of decisions. It exists on the other side. Across conversations that feel awkward. Across work that feels heavier than you want. across moments where you are not sure you will succeed. And that is exactly why most people never reach it. They wait for the feeling of readiness. But readiness rarely arrives first. Action does. It's not about the feeling. It's about the decision. So the question becomes simple. Not easy, but simple. Will you keep designing a life that avoids discomfort? Or will you accept something different? That discomfort is not the signal to stop. It is the signal you are finally near the work that matters. From this point forward, the rule changes. You stop asking whether something feels comfortable. You ask whether it moves you forward. If the answer is yes, you lean in. If the answer is no, you let it go. Slowly, quietly, the relationship with difficulty shifts. Hard things stop feeling like punishment. They start feeling like direction. And with that shift, something inside you settles. Not excitement. Not motivation. Something steadier. Resolve. Get comfortable being uncomfortable, or get comfortable being average. That line sounds blunt, but it tells the truth most people avoid. The life you want will demand a version of you that can tolerate friction. Consistently, not occasionally. And once you accept that, the game becomes clearer. Discipline stops feeling like restriction. It starts feeling like protection. Protection against the slow drift toward ease that steals years without permission. Discipline is not punishment. It's protection. The chapter ends here, but the idea does not. Because understanding discomfort is only the beginning. The real question is what you build with that understanding. How you turn it into movement, into structure, into action that repeats even when motivation disappears. That is where we go next. Because once you accept discomfort as part of the process, another question appears. How do you design a life that moves anyway? That answer lives in the next chapter. The Architecture of Action. Chapter 2. Kill the version of you that needs approval. Someone is in your head right now. Not literally, but close enough. You're about to do something. Say something. Share something. And a quiet thought interrupts. What will they think? The sentence arrives so fast you barely notice it. You adjust the idea. Soften the words. Maybe you stay silent altogether. And the moment passes. Most people call this being considerate, polite, socially aware. But if you watch closely, something else is happening. You just handed control of your life to an invisible audience. Approval seeking rarely looks dramatic. It hides inside ordinary moments. You hesitate before posting your work. You water down an opinion at the last second. You choose the safer path because someone might laugh. None of it feels like surrender, but it is. Piece by piece. And the strange part is how early the habit forms. Most of us learned it long before we knew what it was. A teacher's approval. A parent's smile. A friend's acceptance. Approval meant safety. Disapproval meant distance. So the brain learned quickly. Adjust. Perform. Be the version of yourself that earns the nod. It worked when you were young. It helped you survive rooms where you had little power. But somewhere along the way, the pattern stayed. Long after it stopped serving you. You might recognize the moment. You have an idea that excites you. A business. A piece of writing. A different direction in life. The first thought is energy. The second thought is doubt. Not your doubt. What will they think? Will they say it's unrealistic? Too risky? Embarrassing? So you wait. You ask a few people. Then a few more. And eventually the idea dissolves under the weight of opinions. The dream didn't die from failure. It died from anticipation. Anticipation of judgment. Look closely at what just happened. You asked people who are not living your life to evaluate the direction of it. And somehow their reaction became the deciding factor. That probably sounds harsh, but it happens every day. The entrepreneur who never launches. The artist who keeps their work hidden. The person who stays quiet in meetings while less thoughtful voices dominate the room. Not because they lack ideas, because they fear reactions. Approval seeking is the silent saboteur of ambition. You cannot be unstoppable and approval seeking at the same time. The conflict is simple. Approval requires conformity. Ambition requires deviation. The two cannot occupy the same space for long. If your choices depend on the approval of the crowd, your path will always drift toward the center. Predictable. And you might not notice it happening, because approval feels good. A compliment lands softly. Recognition feels warm. Your brain releases a small reward, but the reward fades quickly, quicker than you expect. And then something interesting happens. You want another one. Validation behaves like a currency with infinite inflation. The more you depend on it, the more you require. One compliment becomes two. One milestone becomes a scan of the room. Did anyone notice? Did anyone react? You might catch yourself checking, refreshing a screen, waiting for someone to confirm that what you did mattered. The approval feels good for a moment. Then the gap returns. Because the gap was never outside you. It was inside. There's a quiet moment I remember. A gallery opening years ago. White walls. Bright lights. People holding small glasses and speaking softly. A young painter stood near one of his pieces. I watched him for a while. He barely looked at the painting. His eyes moved around the room instead, searching faces, waiting for someone to react. Someone did eventually. A nod. A compliment. His shoulders relaxed instantly, for about 30 seconds. Then his eyes started scanning again. That image stayed with me, because it revealed something simple. Approval never ends the search. It restarts it. Actually, that's not quite it. Let me say it differently. Approval trains you to ignore your own compass. You stop asking one question. What do I actually want? Instead you ask another. What will they accept? The shift seems subtle, but it changes everything. Your choices become performances. Your life becomes a stage. And the audience? Half of them aren't paying attention. The other half are too busy worrying about their own performance. Stop performing your life for an audience that isn't even paying attention. You might disagree with that. Some people will say approval matters. That reputation matters. That society runs on feedback. And they're not entirely wrong. Other people's opinions can be information. Useful sometimes. But information is not instruction. And that difference is where freedom begins. Because once approval becomes instruction, your direction disappears. Every decision becomes a negotiation. Every action waits for a signal. Go ahead. Hold back. You hesitate. And the hesitation compounds. History is full of people who moved before approval existed. Not after. Before. Their ideas looked strange at first. Their choices confused people. Some were mocked. Some were dismissed. The applause came later. It always does. But something important happened long before the applause. They stopped asking permission. You don't need their permission. That shift rarely happens all at once. Usually it begins with one uncomfortable realization. Most people are not thinking about you as much as you imagine. They are thinking about themselves, their worries, their plans, their image. The audience you fear barely exists. And the few people who do judge you, they will judge you anyway, whether you act or not. So the question changes. If judgment is unavoidable, why let it dictate your direction? There comes a point where you must separate signal from noise. Approval is noise. Your internal standard is signal. This is where things become quiet, but firm. You stop checking the room before you speak. You stop diluting ideas to avoid reactions. You begin acting from a different center. Not arrogance. Clarity. And clarity changes posture. You move differently when your compass is internal. But this is where most people hesitate, because rejecting approval can feel dangerous. What if people misunderstand you? What if they laugh? What if they disapprove? Those questions feel heavy. But notice something. They are all about other people's reactions. Not your direction. Not your values. They're reactions. And reactions pass quickly. A few minutes of conversation. A few days of gossip. Then the world moves on. The consequences you feared dissolve. But the life you postponed remains postponed. So here is the moment that matters. A small internal fork in the road. On one side is the version of you that seeks approval. Careful. Polished. Constantly checking the room. On the other side is the version that acts from internal standards. Not reckless. Just independent. The difference between them is not talent. Not opportunity. Just a decision. You have a choice. The choice is not loud. It rarely feels heroic. Usually it looks like this. You say the thing you believe. You share the work you created. You move forward with the idea that makes sense to you, without scanning the room first. And something interesting happens. The fear fades faster than expected. Not immediately, but quickly enough that you notice. Because the mind learns something new. Approval was never required to move. Only courage was. And courage grows through use. Over time the shift becomes visible. Not to everyone, but to you. Your decisions become cleaner. Your energy stops leaking into performance. You begin building something that actually belongs to you. Not a life designed for applause. A life designed for truth. And something else changes too. Ironically, approval sometimes arrives anyway. From people who respect independence. But by then it feels different. Less important. Almost irrelevant. Because the foundation was never built on it. Build the life first. The applause comes later, if you even still need it. The hardest part of this process is not ignoring criticism. It is releasing the identity built around approval. The version of you that learned to please, to fit, to perform. That version served a purpose once. But now it limits you. So it must end. Quietly. Without ceremony. Kill the version of you that needs approval. From here the posture changes. You stop asking how something will be received. You ask whether it is honest. Whether it moves your life forward. Whether it aligns with your own standard. If it does, you proceed. If it doesn't, you adjust. The room's reaction no longer leads. Your direction does. This does not make life easier, but it makes it clearer. And clarity has a strange effect. It removes hesitation. You move sooner. You decide faster. You recover from criticism without losing direction. Because criticism no longer controls the compass. That's the key. So when the thought appears again, what will they think? Then ask a better question. What do I think? And the moment you act from that answer, something subtle shifts. The audience fades. The stage disappears. And you begin living a life that is not a performance. Just a direction. Your direction. The next challenge is not approval. It is something quieter. Harder to notice. Even harder to defeat. The mind's tendency to drift without structure. Because independence without discipline eventually collapses into chaos. And that is where we go next. The system that turns intention into consistent action. Chapter 3. Your excuses are lying to you. You said it again today. Maybe not out loud, but the sentence appeared in your mind. I just don't have time. It felt reasonable, true even. Work is busy. Life is crowded. There are responsibilities. So the idea, the thing you said you wanted to build, moved one more day into the future. And the strange part? The mind relaxed. Because the excuse made the tension disappear. At least for a moment. Excuses work like that. They soothe the mind quickly. They explain the delay. They protect your identity. Because if the reason is external, the responsibility is not yours. That's the silent bargain. The mind trades action for explanation. And explanation feels good enough for a while. But here is the uncomfortable question. If the excuse is true, why do you feel the quiet irritation that follows it? Why does the idea keep returning at night? Why does it sit there, unfinished? Every excuse feels logical in the moment. That is what makes them dangerous. They don't arrive wearing the word excuse. They arrive dressed as reasoning, practical thinking, responsible timing. You don't say, I'm avoiding this. You say, now isn't the right time. And the brain nods in agreement, because the brain helped write the story. Look closely at the most common one. I don't have time. You might believe that sentence right now. Many people do. But watch how the day actually unfolds. Hours pass in quiet consumption. Scrolling. Watching. Waiting. Energy is spent everywhere except the thing that matters. And the mind still insists there was no time. That probably sounds harsh. But sometimes harsh is simply accurate. Another excuse appears just as often. I don't have the resources. Money. Connections. Support. The mind lists everything missing. But it rarely performs the opposite exercise. Inventory. What do you actually have? Skills you built years ago. Tools sitting unused. Access to knowledge that once required entire libraries. Most people never audit what is already within reach. They focus on absence instead. Because absence protects them from starting. Actually, that's not quite it. Let me say that differently. Excuses are not really about resources. They are about risk. Starting something exposes you to failure, embarrassment, judgment. So the mind builds a more comfortable narrative. It's not possible yet. But notice the word. Yet can stretch for years, sometimes decades, until the dream becomes something you once considered. There is a line I want you to sit with for a moment. An excuse is just a dream you've decided not to fight for. You might resist that sentence. Many people do. Because some obstacles are real. Life can be difficult. Circumstances vary. Not every path is equal. All of that is true. But the deeper truth remains. History is full of people who began with less than you have right now. Less certainty. Less support. Less comfort. They had reasons to quit. Very good ones. They chose not to use them. That difference seems small. But it changes everything. Think about the people you admire. Founders. Writers. Athletes. Builders. From a distance their success looks clean. Predictable. But if you look closely at the beginning, the conditions were rarely perfect. They lacked money. They lacked approval. They lacked guarantees. What they did not lack was movement. They moved with uncertainty. They acted before everything was ready. And when excuses appeared, they noticed them. But they did not obey them. There is a small scene I remember clearly. A friend sitting at a kitchen table late at night. Laptop open. A business idea half built on the screen. He stared at it for a long time, then closed the laptop. "I'll work on it this weekend," he said. That weekend became the next month, then the next year. The idea never disappeared, but the excuse grew stronger each time. Eventually the mind stopped calling it an idea. It became something else, a missed version of life. That moment happens quietly for many people, and most never notice when the shift occurs. Excuses become habits through repetition. The first time you say them, they feel temporary. The 10th time, they feel permanent. Eventually the brain stops questioning them. They become part of your identity. I'm someone who doesn't have time. I'm someone who isn't ready yet. I'm someone who missed the opportunity. But identities built on excuses are fragile, because they depend on a story that was never fully examined. So here is the work this chapter demands. Not judgment, not shame, just honesty. A full audit. Every excuse standing between you and the life you say you want. Write them down. Every single one. The familiar ones. The comfortable ones. The ones you repeat without thinking. Then pause. And ask one simple question. Is this a real wall? Or is this a door I decided to call a wall? That question matters more than it seems. Because many obstacles are not barriers. They are problems. And problems can be solved, or worked around, or delayed while progress happens elsewhere. But excuses freeze the situation completely. They declare the wall permanent, even when a door is right beside it. You just never reached for the handle. You might feel resistance while doing this. That is normal. The mind protects its stories. It defends them. It repeats them. Because if the story disappears, responsibility appears. And responsibility requires action. Which leads us to the uncomfortable truth. The obstacle in front of you is rarely the real one. The story about the obstacle is. The only thing standing between you and unstoppable is the story you keep telling yourself. But here is the shift most people miss. Seeing the excuse does not mean you eliminate fear. Fear remains. Doubt remains. Uncertainty remains. The difference is simpler. You stop allowing those feelings to decide the outcome. That's the key. You see the excuse. You hear the story. And then you choose whether it gets authority. Because excuses are suggestions, not commands. You have a choice. That choice happens in small moments. A few minutes earlier in the morning. A decision to start imperfectly. A step taken before the mind can negotiate another explanation. The action might look insignificant, but it interrupts the pattern. Each time you act despite the excuse, the brain learns something new. The story was optional. Over time something interesting happens. The excuses still appear. But they lose credibility. They sound rehearsed. Predictable. You recognize them the way you recognize an old script. And once you recognize the script, you can stop performing it. That is when momentum begins. Not explosive. Just steady. Quiet movement replacing elegant explanations. Most people wait for a day when they feel ready. When the excuses disappear. But readiness rarely comes first. Movement creates readiness. Progress creates confidence. And confidence weakens the old stories. You begin trusting something different. Action. Even small action. Especially small action. Eventually a new identity forms. Not someone without obstacles. Not someone without doubt. Just someone who moves anyway. Someone who hears the excuse and keeps working. Someone who sees the door and reaches for the handle. This chapter was never about productivity or efficiency. It was about honesty, the kind that removes comfortable stories. Because once the story dissolves, the path becomes visible. Maybe not easy, but visible. And visibility changes everything. The next challenge appears after this. Once excuses lose power, another problem emerges. The mind wanders. Focus fractures. Action begins, then fades. Which is why the next step is structure. The system that protects your progress from your own inconsistency. Discipline is not punishment. It's protection. And that is where we go next. Chapter 4. Discipline is not motivation. It's a decision. You woke up this morning and already knew the conversation that was coming. Not with anyone else. With yourself. The quiet negotiation. The small delay. The promise to start later. You've had that conversation before. Many times. And every time it sounds reasonable. Just not today. Just not when you're tired. Just not when the mood isn't right. The strange part is this. You already know what needs to be done. The work isn't confusing. The path isn't hidden. But something inside you keeps waiting for a feeling that never arrives on schedule. Motivation. That word gets a lot of respect these days. People talk about it like it's fuel. Like you can't move without it. But motivation behaves more like weather. It shows up without warning. It disappears the same way. And if you build your life around weather, you shouldn't be surprised when the structure shakes. You might be thinking something right now. Something like this. If I just felt more motivated, I'd do the work. That sounds logical. But look closer. There are people who write books while tired. Athletes who train when their bodies protest. Scientists who keep running experiments long after the excitement fades. They are not waking up every day with fire in their chest. They simply decided something. And then they honored that decision. That probably sounds harsh. Because it removes the excuse. But it also gives something back. Control. Motivation is a visitor. Discipline is a decision. Visitors come and go. Decisions stay where you put them. And this is where the pattern begins to reveal itself. Most people are not avoiding effort. They are avoiding discomfort. Not the physical kind. The quieter kind. The moment when you begin something without wanting to. The moment when you sit down to work and your brain immediately suggests escape routes. Check your phone. Get coffee. Maybe start tomorrow instead. You know the voice. It sounds practical. But it's not protecting you. It's protecting your comfort. There's a difference. Comfort feels harmless in the moment. But comfort has a strange way of charging interest later. The task you delay today doesn't disappear. It waits. Then it grows heavier. And eventually it demands a payment much larger than the original cost. People call this procrastination. That word is too gentle. What's really happening is identity drift. Every time you avoid the hard action, something small happens. You cast a vote. A quiet one. But a vote all the same. Miss the workout. That's a vote. Write the page anyway. That's another vote. Turn off the alarm and sleep again. Another vote. Over time the votes stack. And eventually the result becomes obvious. You become the person those votes describe. Every rep, every page, every hard decision, you're voting for who you become. Not once. Every day. Now pause for a second. Picture something small. A gym early in the morning. Fluorescent lights. A rack of weights that smell faintly like metal and rubber. There's a man there before sunrise. Not loud. Not impressive. Just steady. He loads the same barbell he lifted yesterday. He doesn't look excited. Actually, he looks a little tired. But he lifts anyway. Set after set. No audience. No music blasting motivation into his ears. Just repetition. You might think the discipline lives in the muscle. It doesn't. It lives in the decision he made before arriving. The decision not to negotiate with himself. And here's where the uncomfortable truth lands. The gap between who you are and who you want to be will never close through inspiration. Inspiration is temporary. It fades the moment things become inconvenient. The gap closes through action. Boring action. Uncelebrated action. The kind of action that feels almost insulting in its simplicity. Show up. Do the work. Repeat tomorrow. That's the key. And strangely, once you accept this, the pressure changes. Because discipline is often misunderstood. People think discipline is punishment. They imagine strict routines, rigid rules. But real discipline is quieter than that. Discipline is protection. Protection from your own moods. Protection from the version of you that negotiates away the future. Discipline is not punishment. It's protection. It protects the person you are becoming. Actually, let me say that differently. Discipline protects your promises to yourself. And those promises matter more than most people realize. Every time you follow through when you didn't feel like it, something shifts. Your brain notices. Not dramatically, but steadily. It starts updating your identity. This person keeps their word. That identity becomes powerful. Because once you see yourself that way, breaking the pattern feels wrong. Not morally wrong. Just inconsistent. And humans dislike inconsistency. That's why discipline compounds. One kept promise leads to another. One difficult day survived becomes proof the next day is survivable too. Momentum begins to build. Not emotional momentum. Behavioral momentum. The unstoppable person understands this difference. They don't wake up excited every morning. They wake up committed. Motivation might arrive halfway through the work. Or not. The way the work happens. Don't wait to feel like it. Decide, then do. You might disagree with that. You might say feeling matters. And you're not wrong. Feelings matter. But they make terrible leaders. Feelings are signals, not commands. They tell you how the moment feels. They do not tell you what your life should become. That part requires something else. A decision. A quiet one. Usually made when no one else is around. Here's the strange thing. Once you start acting from decision instead of motivation, something unexpected happens. The feeling often follows. Not immediately. Sometimes halfway through the work. Sometimes near the end. But the mind begins to cooperate once it sees movement. Motion creates emotion. Stillness creates doubt. And doubt loves empty time. That's why waiting for motivation almost always fails. Waiting keeps you still. Stillness gives doubt room to speak. Soon the task feels heavier than it actually is. You start believing the resistance means something. But resistance usually means only one thing. You're at the edge of growth. That's where the choice lives. You have a choice. Not a dramatic one. A simple one. Begin the task. Or negotiate with yourself again. Both options feel small in the moment. But their consequences are not small. Because every decision writes a line in the story of who you are becoming. Quietly, without announcement, the disciplined person understands this. They stop chasing the right mood. They stop asking if they feel ready. They remove the vote from emotion entirely. The decision was already made. Now it's just execution. Something interesting happens after enough repetitions. The work becomes normal. Not exciting. Not painful. Just normal. Like brushing your teeth. Like locking the door before leaving the house. And that's when discipline becomes identity. The person who shows up simply shows up. No debate required. People from the outside call it willpower. They imagine heroic effort. But the person living it knows the truth. The hardest moment was the first decision. Everything after that is maintenance. And maintenance is quiet. That quiet is where real progress lives. Not in bursts. In patterns. Patterns repeated long enough that the mind stops arguing. Because eventually the brain learns something important. Escape is no longer an option. And once that realization settles in, a strange calm appears. The energy that used to fuel negotiation becomes available for work. Clarity replaces resistance. Not because the work became easier, because the decision became final. The unstoppable person lives there. Not in excitement, in commitment. They know motivation will come and go, but their decision remains where they left it. Waiting, steady, reliable. And once you experience that stability, you begin to see something clearly. Discipline is not the end of the process. It is the structure that allows action to happen repeatedly, which raises a deeper question. If discipline decides whether you act, what determines how you act? Because effort alone is not enough. Direction matters. Structure matters. The next step is not working harder. The next step is building the system that makes disciplined action inevitable. And that is where we turn next. Chapter 5. Stop playing small to keep others comfortable. You almost said it. Your goal. It was right there. Someone asked what you were working on. You opened your mouth, and then you softened it. You made it smaller. You said something safer. Something people could nod at without shifting in their chairs. You've done that before. Most people have. Not once. Repeatedly. And if you're honest, it rarely feels like fear in the moment. It feels like politeness. Like humility. Like reading the room. But there is a quieter pattern underneath that behavior. A pattern most people never name. The slow habit of shrinking. Not dramatically. Just a few inches at a time. A dream trimmed here. A goal left unspoken there. You learn which parts of you make others uncomfortable. Then you begin adjusting. Without even noticing. And the strange thing is, nobody usually asks you to do this. You volunteer. Early in life you make a quiet agreement. Don't be too much. Don't stand too far ahead. Don't make the room awkward. So you calibrate your ambition to match the people around you. The room sets the ceiling. You might be wondering something now. If this is really a problem. After all, fitting in keeps things smooth. It keeps relationships easy. It avoids conflict. So here's the question that matters. When did other people's comfort become the limit of your life? Most people cannot answer that. Because the moment was never announced. It happened slowly. Maybe it started at a dinner table. You mentioned an idea. Something big. Someone laughed. Not cruelly. Just casually. Let's be realistic. And that sentence stayed with you longer than it should have. Or maybe it was a friend. You talked about a goal. They smiled in that careful way. The kind of smile people use when they think you're reaching too far. So next time, you said less. Over time the message sinks in. Stand out too much and the room gets quiet. So you adapt. You soften your edges. You become easier to digest. But here is the uncomfortable truth. Playing small is not humility. Humility means you know your worth and don't need to shout about it. Playing small means you hide your worth so nobody feels uneasy. From the outside those two behaviors look identical. Inside, they feel completely different. One feels steady. The other feels like suffocation. You might disagree with that. Some people say shrinking is kindness. Keeping the peace. Not making others feel bad. That sounds noble. But let's examine it honestly. If someone else feels threatened by your growth, whose work is that? Not yours. That probably sounds harsh. Especially when the people involved are close to you. Family, friends, the people who have known you the longest. But closeness does not remove human fear. Sometimes it magnifies it. Because when you change, it forces others to confront their own choices. Your ambition becomes a mirror. And mirrors can be uncomfortable. So people push gently. They joke. They advise caution. They suggest safer routes. Not because they want to stop you, because they want the world to stay familiar, predictable, for them. And slowly you begin shaping your life around their comfort. You don't say the bigger goal. You don't take the louder step. You stay just visible enough, just ambitious enough, just successful enough, but not so much that it changes the balance in the room. The tragedy is not that this pressure exists. The tragedy is that most people agree to it, quietly, without even noticing the contract they just signed. You were not built to fit into someone else's comfort zone. Let that sit for a moment, because the mind resists it. But I don't want to lose people. Fair concern. Growth changes relationships. That's not drama. That's gravity. When one person moves, the system adjusts. Sometimes people move with you. Sometimes they stay where they are. That distance can feel painful. But shrinking yourself to prevent that distance creates another kind of pain. A quieter one. The kind that builds over years. The feeling that you left parts of yourself unused, unspoken, unlived. I remember a moment years ago. A small room. Fluorescent light buzzing overhead. Coffee gone cold on the table. Someone asked me what I was working toward. I told them. Honestly. The room went still. One person chuckled softly. Another looked down at their phone. And in that moment I felt the instinct. Shrink. Make it sound smaller. Make them comfortable again. Actually, that's not quite right. The instinct wasn't kindness. It was fear. Fear of standing alone in the room. Fear of being the one person who said the bigger thing out loud. But something else happened too. A second thought. Quiet but clear. If I shrink here, I'll be doing it forever. So I didn't correct myself. I let the words sit there. Uncomfortable. Unapologetic. Nothing dramatic happened. Nobody clapped. Nobody changed their life. But something inside me shifted. A boundary formed. Not against them. Against the habit of disappearing. That moment matters more than it sounds. Because every person who does meaningful work reaches that moment. The point where they stop apologizing for the size of their thinking. And this is where the real decision appears. Not about ambition. About permission. Most people spend years waiting for someone to approve their expansion. A mentor. A parent. A boss. Some invisible authority. But here's the quiet truth. You don't need their permission. Not to think bigger. Not to speak clearly about what you're building. Not to take up space in the conversation. Permission is rarely granted. It is usually taken. Calmly. Without announcement. You simply stop asking. Now, this does not mean arrogance. Arrogance demands attention. This is different. This is presence. The willingness to stand fully inside who you are becoming, without performing humility to soothe the room. And that shift changes things. People sense it, not through your words, through your posture, your certainty, your refusal to shrink when the room tilts slightly. Some will respect it, some will resist it. Both reactions are information. Neither should decide your direction. Because here is the deeper insight. Your life does not expand by accident. It expands the moment you stop editing yourself for approval. That is the hinge point. Before that moment, you are reacting to the room. After that moment, the room begins reacting to you. You might still feel the old reflex. The urge to soften the edges. To laugh off your own seriousness. To make your plans sound like jokes. That reflex doesn't disappear overnight. Habits rarely do. But you begin catching it earlier. Mid-sentence sometimes. You notice the moment your voice starts shrinking. And you correct it. Not loudly. Just by finishing the sentence honestly. You take the space your words deserve. And something interesting happens when you do that long enough. The world adjusts. Rooms that once felt intimidating become neutral. Conversations shift. New people appear. People who are not threatened by ambition. People who are building things themselves. They recognize the signal, and they respond to it, not with applause, with respect. But none of that begins until the shrinking stops. Stop shrinking. The world doesn't need a smaller version of you. It needs the one you keep editing out. The one who speaks directly. The one who says the bigger idea without cushioning it. The one who accepts that some people will misunderstand. And continues anyway. Because living at half size eventually becomes exhausting. You feel it in subtle ways. A tightness in conversations. A hesitation before speaking. A quiet resentment you can't quite name. That feeling is not arrogance trying to escape. It is truth asking for space. And you can ignore it. Many people do. They build entire lives around being agreeable, predictable, comfortable to everyone. But somewhere inside, they know. They know they stepped back when they should have stepped forward. That knowledge lingers. You don't have to carry it. You have a choice. Not about becoming louder. About becoming honest. About allowing your full range to exist in the room. Ambition included. Vision included. Presence included. Some people will lean in. Others will step away. Both outcomes are clean. And clean outcomes are better than quiet suffocation. Because once you stop shrinking, something else becomes possible. You begin designing a life that actually fits your size. And that requires a different kind of courage. Not social courage. Structural courage. Because stepping forward is only the beginning. The real question comes next. Once you stop playing small, what structure will hold the life you are building? That question leads somewhere precise. Somewhere practical. The architecture behind real expansion. And that is where we go next. Chapter 6. The people around you are either fuel or poison. You already know who they are. The names came to mind the moment this topic appeared. The people you spend the most time with. Friends, family, colleagues. The ones whose voices fill your week. Now here's the uncomfortable question. When you leave their presence, do you feel sharper or smaller? Most people never ask that question out loud. Because once you ask it honestly, the answers begin to rearrange things. Relationships stop feeling neutral. And that's the first truth we have to face. Your environment is not neutral. The people closest to you are shaping you. Quietly. Constantly. Not through advice. Through exposure. Spend enough time around a group of people and something strange happens. Your language shifts. Your expectations adjust. Your standards begin to match theirs. You don't notice it happening. That's what makes it powerful. And dangerous. Look closely at almost any tight group of friends. 5 people who see each other regularly. You'll notice similarities. In income. In ambition. In what they consider normal. Even in what they complain about. This is not coincidence. It's absorption. Human beings mirror the rooms they spend time in. Attitudes leak across conversations. Beliefs transfer through casual remarks. Soon the limits of the group begin to feel like the limits of reality. And once that ceiling forms, most people never question it. They assume the room represents the world. But it doesn't. It represents only the room. Show me your circle, and I'll show you your future. That sentence is uncomfortable for a reason. Because it removes randomness. It suggests something many people would rather ignore. The direction of your life is strongly tied to the people you stand beside. Not because they control you. Because proximity changes perspective. Spend enough evenings with people who complain about work. And work begins to feel like a trap. Spend enough time with people who build things. And effort begins to feel normal. Same world, different atmosphere. You might be thinking something right now. What if these people are family? Fair question. Those relationships carry weight. History, shared memories, a sense of obligation that runs deep, which makes them the hardest relationships to evaluate clearly. A childhood friend, a sibling, a partner you built years with. These bonds are dense. They come with nostalgia, inside jokes, stories that stretch back decades. All of that makes honest assessment difficult, because once you ask the question, the answer can feel disloyal. But honesty is not betrayal. It's clarity. Sometimes the people who love you most also fear your change the most. Not because they want to hold you back, because your growth shifts the balance they understand. If you rise, the old dynamic moves. Conversations change. Roles dissolve. Distance appears where familiarity once lived. That uncertainty scares people. So they try to keep things steady. They tease your ambition. They remind you of who you used to be. They encourage safer choices, often with kindness. But kindness can still create gravity, and gravity still pulls. Let's slow down here. This is not an argument for cutting people off. That reaction is too blunt, and usually unnecessary. Most relationships don't require deletion. They require adjustment, distance sometimes, boundaries sometimes, and occasionally a direct conversation that nobody really wants to have. But pretending the dynamic is harmless, that rarely works. Energy flows somewhere. Every week you invest attention, emotional bandwidth, and that investment produces either momentum or friction. Some people push you forward. Others hold you exactly where you are. Not every relationship deserves a seat at the table of your future. Sit with that sentence for a moment, because it sounds colder than it actually is. It's not about judging people. It's about recognizing compatibility. Two people can care deeply for each other and still move in different directions. Growth changes trajectories. And sometimes those trajectories stop overlapping. That's not failure. It's evolution. But evolution requires honesty. And honesty begins with a simple observation. How do you feel after spending time with someone? Lighter? Heavier? Do conversations expand your thinking? Or do they circle the same frustrations again and again? Notice the patterns. Not once. Repeatedly. Because patterns reveal the truth that individual moments hide. I remember a conversation years ago. Late evening. Two friends sitting across from me at a small table. One talked about ideas. New projects. You could feel the energy building in the room. Every sentence opened another possibility. Then the conversation shifted. The second friend started talking. Different tone. Different focus. Complaints about work. People who were unfair. Plans that never seemed to start. After 10 minutes the air felt slower. Heavier somehow. Both men were good people. Both had known me for years. But the effect of their presence was completely different. One conversation pulled the mind forward. The other quietly pinned it in place. That difference matters more than most people admit. Because proximity shapes identity. Spend enough time around people who dismiss ambition, and ambition begins to feel embarrassing. Spend enough time around people who expect progress, and progress begins to feel inevitable. Get around people who make your goals feel inevitable, not impossible. That shift can compress years of confusion. One mentor, one serious peer, one person who has already built something real. That relationship can change the trajectory of your thinking. Not through lectures, through example. You watch how they approach problems, how they speak about effort, how they refuse to entertain excuses. At first it feels intimidating, maybe even uncomfortable. But discomfort in the right room is a signal. It means the ceiling just moved higher. Many people avoid that feeling. They prefer rooms where they are the most accomplished person present. It feels safer, more flattering, but it freezes growth. Actually, that's not quite right. It slowly suffocates it. Because when nobody challenges your thinking stops evolving. And stagnation rarely announces itself. It feels like stability, until years pass. Then the cost becomes visible. Here's the quiet shift that changes everything. Instead of asking who feels comfortable, ask who makes you sharper, who forces you to think harder, who refuses to accept your half-finished reasoning. Those people are rare, and they are invaluable. Sometimes they are older, sometimes younger, sometimes they come from a completely different field. But when you meet one, you feel it immediately. The conversation lifts. Your mind stretches. Ideas start moving again. That is intellectual oxygen. Seek it deliberately. Be willing to sit in rooms where you are the least accomplished person. Not permanently, but often enough that your standards keep expanding. Ego resists this. Ego prefers admiration. Growth prefers friction. You have a choice. Stay surrounded by familiarity, or step into rooms that require you to upgrade. One path protects your identity, the other transforms it. Neither choice is announced. You make it quietly through the company you keep, through invitations accepted, through invitations declined, through conversations you continue, and those you slowly let fade. And again, this does not require cruelty. Most adjustments happen naturally once your direction becomes clear. You spend more time where the energy aligns, less time where it doesn't. Distance forms. No speeches required. People who belong in your future will move with you. Those who don't will drift. That drift can feel strange at first. You may question yourself, wonder if you're being selfish. But ask yourself something simple. If someone else's habits quietly shape your life, shouldn't you choose those influences carefully? Your circle is not decoration. It is infrastructure. The structure that holds your thinking in place. Change the structure, the thinking follows. That realization gives you leverage. Not power over others. Power over proximity. Who gets your attention? Who gets your time? Who gets a seat close enough to influence your direction? Choose carefully. Because years from now, when people look at the life you built, they will assume it was mostly about discipline. Effort. Those matter. But they miss something quieter. The rooms you stood in. The voices you allowed near your thinking. The conversations that shaped your standards. That invisible architecture matters more than most people realize. And once you see it clearly, you stop leaving it to chance. You begin designing your environment the same way you design your work. Intentionally. Which leads to the next question. Once your circle begins to shift, how do you make sure the habits inside your life actually hold? Because the right people create momentum. But momentum still needs structure. And that structure comes next. Chapter 7. Failure is not the opposite of success, it's the price of it. It usually happens right after. The silence. You tried something. It didn't work. Maybe the project failed. Maybe the opportunity disappeared. Maybe the result landed far below what you expected. And in that moment, something inside you contracts. Not because of the loss, because of the meaning you attach to it. Failure. That word carries weight. Too much weight. The moment it appears, people begin rewriting the story. I'm not cut out for this. I should have known. Other people can do it, but not me. You've probably heard that voice. Maybe recently. But pause for a second and look closer. What exactly happened? Something didn't work. That's the entire event. Yet the mind turns it into a verdict about identity. A single outcome becomes a statement about who you are. That leap happens so fast most people never question it. And that's where the real damage begins. Because if failure means something about you, then the safest move is obvious. Avoid it. Avoid the risk. Avoid the attempt. Avoid the situation that might expose you. So people wait. They prepare endlessly. They plan. They think. They gather more information. But they don't move. Not fully. Not where the real uncertainty lives. Because somewhere in the background sits an invisible audience. People watching. People judging. People remembering the moment you fell short. That image keeps many intelligent people frozen for years. But here is the strange truth. The audience you fear is mostly imaginary. Everyone else is busy protecting themselves from their own failure. They're not cataloging yours. They barely notice. Though the fear persists. Which raises an uncomfortable question. Are you afraid of failing? Or are you afraid of being seen failing? That distinction matters more than it seems. Because the loss itself is usually survivable. Money can be earned again. Projects can restart. Skills improve. But social judgment feels permanent. Public. Embarrassing. So the mind tries to avoid that exposure at all costs. And in doing so, it avoids the very mechanism that produces progress. Failure is not the opposite of success. It's the price of it. That sentence is easy to hear. Much harder to live. Because failure rarely looks noble when it's happening. It looks messy, confusing, sometimes humiliating. Plans collapse. People doubt you. You doubt yourself. None of that feels educational in the moment. It feels like proof you made the wrong move. But time reveals something different. Look closely at any serious achievement. A company that changed an industry. An athlete dominating their sport. A scientist making a breakthrough. Behind every visible success sits a long record of attempts that didn't work. Not one or two. Dozens. Sometimes hundreds. Those attempts are not side stories. They are the foundation. The entrepreneur you admire probably has abandoned projects buried in the past. Ideas that failed. Partnerships that dissolved. Products nobody bought. The athlete you watch perform flawlessly on game day has missed more shots in practice than you have ever taken. Failure is not the interruption. It is the process itself. Every failure is a receipt for the lesson you needed to buy. Think about that word for a moment. Receipt. It means something was purchased. Something gained. But most people throw the receipt away before reading it. They treat the moment as embarrassment instead of information. And information is the real value. Because failure contains data success cannot provide. Success tells you something worked. Failure tells you exactly where it didn't. Where the strategy broke. Where the skill was incomplete. Where the timing was wrong. That knowledge is expensive. But it is precise. Actually, let me say that differently. Failure is the fastest feedback system you will ever encounter. The moment something collapses, the signal appears. Immediate. Uncomfortable. But accurate. People who grow quickly learn to read that signal. They ask a different question. Not, why did this happen to me? But what does this reveal? That shift changes the emotional weight of the moment. Failure stops being a verdict. It becomes a report. A piece of data pointing toward the next adjustment. You might disagree with that. Some failures hurt too much to analyze calmly. A business collapses. A career move backfires. A public mistake damages reputation. Those moments leave scars. Pretending otherwise would be dishonest. But even in those cases, the lesson remains. Hidden perhaps. Buried under emotion. But present. And people who eventually succeed tend to share a strange habit. They go looking for it. Not immediately. Sometimes weeks later. Sometimes months. But eventually they return to the wreckage and study it. What actually happened? Where did the reasoning fail? Which assumption turned out to be wrong? That examination creates something powerful. A correction. The next attempt becomes sharper, more informed, more resilient. Without the failure, that correction never appears. Which is why people who avoid failure also avoid refinement. Their ideas remain theoretical, untested, untouched by reality. Reality is brutal, but it is honest. And honest feedback accelerates growth. That is why some people seem to advance so quickly. It's not luck. They simply accumulate lessons faster than others. Fail faster. Learn faster. Win sooner. That phrase is often misunderstood. It does not mean chasing failure recklessly. It means removing the fear that slows experimentation. When fear disappears, action increases. When action increases, feedback multiplies. Soon the learning curve steepens. Progress accelerates. Meanwhile, others remain stuck in preparation, waiting for certainty, waiting for the perfect plan, waiting to feel ready. But readiness rarely arrives before action. Action produces readiness. That is the paradox. The unstoppable person eventually accepts something the average person resists. Failure is predictable, not random, not surprising, predictable. Every new pursuit carries a failure tax. You pay it in attempts, in mistakes, in revisions. Some people refuse to pay. They stay where the risk is low, comfortable, stable, and slowly limited. Others pay the tax early. They step forward. They experiment. They stumble. Then they adjust and go again. Over time, the difference becomes dramatic. Not because one group is smarter, because one group collected more information. Through experience. Through visible failure. Think about Thomas Edison for a moment. You've heard the story. Thousands of attempts to create a working light bulb. Thousands of experiments that did not work. Most people would call that a sequence of failures. He called them discoveries. Thousands of ways that didn't work. Each one narrowing the path toward the solution. That is not optimism. It's strategy. Because once you see failure as information, fear loses its leverage. You stop protecting your image. You start protecting your learning speed. And learning speed determines trajectory. Of course, none of this removes discomfort. Failure still stings. It still disrupts plans. But the emotional meaning shifts. Instead of shame, curiosity appears. Instead of retreat, analysis begins. And then something simple happens. You try again. With better information. With clearer thinking. With one fewer mistake waiting in the dark. The only real failure is the one you refuse to learn from. Everything else is part of the cost. The necessary friction of building something that didn't exist before. You may still feel hesitation before the next attempt. That's normal. Fear doesn't vanish. It just loses authority. You see it for what it is. A signal that something uncertain lies ahead. And uncertainty is exactly where growth lives. So when the next failure appears, and it will, pause before judging it. Look at it carefully. Ask the useful question. What did this teach me? Then extract the lesson. Adjust the approach. Move forward again. Because progress is not built from perfect moves. It is built from corrected ones. And once you understand that process, something shifts inside your thinking. You stop fearing the attempt. You begin focusing on the system behind it. The structure that allows repeated action. Repeated learning. Repeated adjustment. Because success is rarely a single breakthrough. It is a pattern. A structure of behaviors that produce results over time. And understanding that structure is the next step. Chapter 8. Your identity is the blueprint. Change it first. You've probably done this before. You set a goal. You make a plan. You promise yourself that this time will be different. You even feel a small surge of confidence at the beginning. A clean notebook. A fresh week. A new routine. And for a few days, maybe even a few weeks, you follow through. Then something quiet happens. You miss a day. Then another. And slowly, almost politely, you slide back into the version of yourself you were trying to leave. No explosion. No dramatic failure. Just gravity. You tell yourself it's discipline. Or motivation. Or maybe the plan wasn't good enough. But if you're honest, there's another feeling underneath it. A strange familiarity. Because part of you expected it. Not consciously. But somewhere deeper. A small voice that says, yeah, this is who I am. And that voice is rarely questioned. Most people try to change behavior first. They change the schedule, the routine, the habits, wake up earlier, eat differently, work harder, but they leave one thing untouched. Identity, the quiet story running in the background about who they are. And behavior always answers to that story. Boys, look closely at the language people use. One person says, I'm trying to get fit. Another says, I train. Same goal. Very different architecture. The first person negotiates with themselves every morning. The alarm rings. The body feels heavy. The weather looks bad. And suddenly a debate begins. Maybe tomorrow. Maybe later. Maybe this isn't the right time. Because the action conflicts with their identity. They are trying to do something that a different version of themselves would do. So the mind pushes back. Not violently. Just enough. The second person doesn't debate. They don't ask whether they feel like training. They train because that's what someone like them does. It's not a heroic decision. It's alignment. You might resist that idea. You might think identity is something fixed, something inherited, personality, upbringing, history, all the things that formed you. But identity is not a permanent structure. It's a pattern built from repeated evidence. And evidence comes from action. That is the part people miss. They wait until they feel like a different person. Until the confidence appears. Until the belief feels real. But belief almost never comes first. Action does. You don't rise to your goals. You fall to your identity. That's the key. When pressure appears, when motivation fades, you drop to the level of the person you believe you are. Not the person you hope to be. The one you recognize. The one with proof behind it. Let me ask you something that might feel uncomfortable. When you imagine the future version of yourself, the one who is disciplined, focused, steady, do you actually believe you are that person? Or do you feel like you're borrowing their habits for a while? Trying them on like someone else's jacket. Because the mind can feel that difference. And when it senses a costume, it waits. It waits for the moment you take it off. Identity drift is real. Most people never choose who they become. They simply slide into patterns. Old habits repeat. Old fears return. Old ceilings quietly reappear. Year after year. Not because they want them. Because they never interrupted the identity that produces them. And identity has momentum. But there's another way this works. A quieter one. You can construct identity deliberately. Brick by brick. Decision by decision. Evidence by evidence. Not through declarations. Through proof. Actually, let me slow down here. Because this part matters more than people think. The brain does not build identity from intentions. It builds identity from data. Small, boring data points. You wake up early 3 days in a row. The mind notices. You finish something you said you would finish. Another data point. You keep a promise to yourself when nobody else is watching. Another. Each one whispers the same message. I am the kind of person who does this. One whisper isn't convincing, but 10 are harder to ignore. 50 start to feel real. 100 becomes identity. That's how it forms. Not with grand gestures. With evidence. I remember a very small moment from years ago. Early morning. Still dark outside. I was sitting at a cheap kitchen table with a notebook open in front of me. Nothing dramatic was happening. Just quiet. I had told myself the night before that I would wake up early and work. And the alarm had gone off. I didn't feel inspired. I didn't feel strong. Honestly, I felt tired and slightly annoyed. But I sat down anyway, pen in hand. And something strange happened. Not motivation. Recognition. A small thought that hadn't existed before. So, this is what someone like me does. It was tiny, but it stayed. That's how identity begins to shift. Quiet proof. Most people search for big transformation moments. But the mind trusts repetition more than intensity. Intensity fades. Repetition accumulates. That probably sounds less exciting than you hoped. Excitement doesn't build identity. Consistency does. The fastest way to change who you are is to collect evidence. Small wins. Kept promises. Finished commitments. Every time you follow through, the mind records it. Every time you break a promise to yourself, it records that too. And over time, a pattern appears. The pattern becomes belief. The belief becomes identity. And identity quietly controls behavior. You might be thinking something right now. Maybe this feels circular. Act like the person you want to become, in order to become that person. That's exactly what it is. The action comes first. The belief catches up later. At first. Believe second. Become third. That order matters. There's another piece people overlook. They try to change everything at once. New routine. New habits. New life. But identity rarely changes under that kind of pressure. The mind rejects it. Too unfamiliar. Too fast. Start with one thing. One area where the future version of you behaves differently. Not perfectly. Just consistently enough to create evidence. Maybe it's how you start the morning. Maybe it's how you finish your work. Maybe it's one promise you keep every day without negotiation. Nothing dramatic. Just proof. Because once identity begins to shift, behavior follows without resistance. You stop forcing yourself. You stop negotiating. You simply act in alignment with who you've become. That's when effort starts to feel lighter. Not easy, but natural. And here is the quiet decision hiding underneath all of this. You can continue operating from the identity you inherited, or you can begin constructing the one you choose. You have a choice. Not about the past. About the next piece of evidence. The next action. The next brick. The strange thing about identity is that it doesn't require belief at the beginning. It requires participation. You act like the person you are becoming, even when the feeling isn't there yet. Especially then, because the mind is watching, recording, updating the story. And one day, without much fanfare, something changes. The old version of you tries to reappear. The old excuse. The old hesitation. But it feels unfamiliar now. Out of place. Like wearing a jacket that no longer fits. Not because you forced yourself to change. Because the evidence says you already did. You don't rise to your goals. You fall to your identity. So the real work isn't chasing bigger goals. It's becoming the person those goals belong to. Quietly, deliberately, one decision at a time. Because the next step after identity is something most people never build. Structure. Not motivation. Not intensity. Architecture. The systems that make the new identity inevitable. And that's where we're going next. Chapter 9. Silence the noise. Your focus is your fortune. You are about to start something important. Work that actually matters. Maybe writing. Maybe building something. Maybe thinking through a problem that deserves your full mind. You sit down. The screen opens. And almost without noticing, your hand reaches for the phone. Just for a second. Just to check something small. A message. A notification. A headline. Nothing serious. 5 minutes later you're still scrolling. Not because you want to be. Because you drifted there. And the strange part is, you knew it would happen. Some part of you expected it. So let me ask you something quietly uncomfortable. When did your attention stop belonging to you? People talk about time management. Schedules. Calendars. Morning routines. But time is rarely the real problem. Attention is. You can have 3 free hours and produce nothing. Or 1 protected hour and produce something that changes everything. The difference is not time. It's focus. Modern life runs on your attention. Every platform. Every notification. Every bright red badge on a screen. All of it designed by people whose job is to keep you looking. Not for a moment. For as long as possible. And they are very good at it. You might think you're choosing what you look at. But most of the time, you're reacting. Something pulls. You respond. Again and again. Tiny hooks in the mind. The average person checks their phone dozens of times a day. Maybe more. Short bursts. 10 seconds here. 30 seconds there. A quick glance while standing in line. Another while waiting for a video to load. None of it feels serious. But attention doesn't work that way. Attention fragments. Every interruption leaves a residue. A small mental echo. Part of your mind stays with the thing you just looked at. And now the work in front of you gets the leftovers. That is the hidden pattern. Not laziness. Not lack of discipline. Fragmentation. Your focus gets split into tiny pieces and scattered across the day. By the time you sit down to do something meaningful, there is not much left. You might be thinking this is normal. Everyone lives this way now. Everyone multitasks. Everyone switches tabs and checks messages. That's just the environment. And that's exactly the problem. Because the environment has trained you to believe that fractured attention is normal. It isn't. Human beings were built for depth. Long stretches of thought. Single problems held in the mind long enough to actually understand them. But most people rarely experience that anymore. The mind jumps. Swipe. Always moving. Never settling. Let me put this plainly. What you give your attention to, you give your life to. Not metaphorically. Literally. Hours become days. Days become years. And the direction of those hours decides the direction of everything else. That probably sounds heavier than you expected. Because attention is heavier than most people admit. The most valuable work in human history came from deep focus. Long periods of quiet effort. Scientists thinking through problems without interruption. Writers sitting alone with a blank page. Inventors holding one idea in their mind until it finally opened. Not perfect focus, but sustained focus. Enough time for the brain to move past the surface. Into something deeper. That kind of work still exists. But it's becoming rare. And rarity has value. Right now most people divide their attention into pieces. Messages. Feeds. Videos. Opinions. A constant stream of input. So the person who can sit down, remove the noise, and focus on one meaningful thing, that person moves differently. Their output compounds. Their thinking sharpens. Their work carries weight, because it was built in silence. In a distracted world, focus is a superpower. You might disagree with that. You might say your job demands constant connection. Messages coming in. People needing answers. And sometimes that's true. But most of the noise people accept is optional. Self-invited. Habitual. Let me tell you about a small moment I noticed once. I was sitting in a quiet room working on something difficult. Phone face down on the desk. No notifications. No music. Just silence. At first it felt uncomfortable. My mind kept reaching for something. A message. Anything. And then the phone lit up. A small glow on the table. No sound. Just light. I watched my hand move toward it. Almost automatically. Like muscle memory. And I stopped halfway. Just watched it. The urge was physical. That surprised me. Not curiosity. Impulse. Like scratching an itch. That's when it became obvious. The habit had been trained. Over and over. Respond. Look again. The loop. Breaking that loop felt strange at first. Quiet can feel empty when you're not used to it. But something else appears after a while. Thoughts start finishing themselves. Ideas connect. Problems soften enough to understand. The mind stretches again. Most people never stay in that space long enough. They escape it. The moment the work feels slow. The moment boredom appears. They reach for noise. But boredom is not the enemy. It's the doorway. On the other side of boredom, focus deepens. But you have to stay long enough for the mind to settle. Actually, no, let me say that differently. Focus isn't something you wait for. It's something you protect. That's the shift. Because the world will not protect it for you. Quite the opposite. Every system around you profits from stealing it. So if you want real output, real thinking, real progress, you build a boundary. A quiet fortress around your best hours. Not forever. Just long enough. Phone away. Notifications off. One task. One direction for the mind. Nothing else. That probably sounds simple. It is. But simple things become powerful when they are rare. And right now sustained focus is rare. There is another mistake people make here. They try to protect too many things. Too many goals. Too many projects. The mind scatters again. Instead, ask yourself a blunt question. What are the 2 or 3 outputs that would actually move your life forward? Not 10. 2 or 3. Work that matters. Work that compounds. Everything else is background noise. Once you know those outputs, the rest becomes clear. You protect the time needed to produce them. Not casually. Deliberately. Like something valuable. Because it is. And here is the quiet truth most people avoid. Distraction feels harmless in the moment. One more scroll. One more clip. One more quick check. But the cost accumulates invisibly. Your attention weakens. Your thinking becomes shallow. And the work that could have changed things never fully forms. Not because you lacked ability. Because your mind never stayed long enough. You have a choice. Not about the world's noise. That will continue. But about your participation in it. About the hours you guard. About the work you allow your mind to enter fully. When you begin protecting your attention, something subtle happens. Your days feel longer. Not literally. Mentally. Because your mind is no longer bouncing between fragments. It moves in one direction. Thought extends. Ideas deepen. Work finishes. And with every session of real focus, the habit strengthens. You start trusting your mind again. Not for speed. For depth. And depth is where meaningful work lives. So guard your focus like it's the most valuable thing you own. Because it is. Your attention decides what grows in your life. Noise. Or substance. Movement. Or drift. The difference rarely announces itself in the moment. But over time, it becomes obvious. And once your focus is protected, something else becomes necessary. Structure. Not inspiration. Not bursts of effort. A deliberate system that turns focused hours into consistent output. That's where the next step begins. Because attention alone is powerful. But attention combined with structure changes everything. Chapter 10. Hard work is not enough. Work with direction. You feel productive. You worked all day. Answered messages. Handled problems. Moved from one task to the next. By evening you feel tired. Not lazy tired. Real tired. The kind that comes from effort. But there is a small question waiting in the background. What actually moved forward today? That question can feel unfair. Because you did work. You stayed busy. You responded quickly. You solved things that needed solving. And yet the larger thing, the thing you care about, still feels exactly where it was yesterday. Maybe even last year. So what happened? Where did the effort go? Most people assume the answer is simple. They believe they need more discipline, more hours, more intensity, work harder, push longer, wake earlier, and sometimes that helps for a while. But eventually they notice something uncomfortable. Hard work alone does not guarantee movement. You can work incredibly hard and stay exactly where you are. That statement bothers people. Because effort feels like it should be enough. We grow up hearing it. Work hard and things will work out. Work hard and progress will follow. Work hard and you will get ahead. But the world does not reward effort alone. It rewards directed effort. And those are very different things. Imagine a rowing team in the middle of a lake. Everyone is strong. Everyone is committed. They dig their oars into the water with everything they have. But half of them pull toward the north. The other half pull south. The boat strains. Water splashes. Muscles burn. From the outside it looks impressive. From above, the boat barely moves. Maximum effort. Zero direction. That image makes sense immediately. But people rarely apply it to their own lives. They assume motion equals progress. If the calendar is full, things must be improving. If the day felt busy, something meaningful must have happened. But activity can hide confusion. Movement can hide misalignment. And busyness is very good at disguising drift. Let me ask you something quietly difficult. Right now, what are you actually building? Not what you hope might happen someday. Not vague improvement. What specific result are your daily actions pointing toward? Take a second with that. Because many people cannot answer it clearly. Not because they lack intelligence. Because the question is uncomfortable. Clarity removes excuses. When direction is vague, almost any task can feel justified. Emails feel productive. Meetings feel necessary. Endless small responsibilities appear important, but none of them push the larger thing forward. So the day fills up, energy drains, and the real work remains untouched. This is where the problem hides. Not in laziness. In diffusion. Your effort spreads across too many directions. Each piece makes sense on its own. Together, they cancel each other out. Work hard. But work hard in one direction. That sounds simple. But simplicity is often mistaken for ease. In reality, it demands something most people avoid. Ruthless clarity. Clarity asks 3 blunt questions. What is the most important goal right now? What action moves you directly toward it? And what are you doing instead of that action? That last one tends to sting. Because the answer is usually obvious and slightly embarrassing. You might say you want to build something meaningful, but your hours dissolve into maintenance. You might say you want to write, but the day disappears inside messages. You might say you want to improve your work, but attention spreads across 20 small tasks. None of them wrong. All of them safer than the real thing. You might disagree with that. You might say life simply requires juggling many responsibilities. And that is true. But direction still matters. Without it, the mind drifts toward whatever feels urgent. Urgent rarely means important. Urgent just means loud. The uncomfortable truth is this: busy is not the same as productive. Stop confusing movement with progress. That line lands hard for a reason, because many people secretly know it already. But this truth is not meant to punish you. It is information, a diagnostic. When effort does not produce results, the problem is rarely effort. It is alignment. Your energy is strong. Your direction is scattered. Change the direction and the same effort suddenly moves you farther. I remember noticing this in a very ordinary moment. Late afternoon. Sun coming through the window at an angle. Dust floating in the air. My desk covered in papers. Work everywhere. I had spent the whole day getting things done. Yet the one task that actually mattered sat untouched. Right in the center of the desk. A single page. Waiting. I stared at it for a long time. Then I laughed. Not happily. More like recognition. I had worked very hard to avoid the one thing that would move everything forward. That realization was not dramatic, just quiet. But it changed the way I looked at effort. Because effort without direction is strangely comfortable. You feel productive. You stay occupied. You avoid the uncertainty that comes with the real work. Direction removes that comfort. It exposes the one action that matters most. And then it asks a simple question. Will you do it? You have a choice. Not about how busy the world is. Not about how many requests come your way. But about the direction of your effort. You decide which work deserves your strongest attention, and which work quietly disappears. This is where prioritization becomes a skill, not a personality trait. A skill. It improves through practice. You look at your actions. You compare them to your goals. And you start cutting. Tasks that feel productive but change nothing. Projects that dilute your attention. Commitments that no longer point toward the future you want. You let them go, even when they feel good to keep. That probably sounds harsh. It is. But direction always requires subtraction. Without it, everything competes equally. And the essential thing loses. Something interesting happens when direction becomes clear. Your workday changes shape. Less noise. More intention. You sit down and already know the one action that matters. No searching. No wandering through tasks hoping something important appears. The path is visible. And now effort has somewhere to go. When effort and clarity combine, progress becomes visible. Not instantly, but steadily. Like a compass correcting small degrees over time. One day of alignment does not transform much. But weeks do. Months certainly do. Direction compounds. You will still drift sometimes. Everyone does. Distraction returns. Old habits creep in. A week slips by where the important work stays unfinished. That is human. The difference is how quickly you notice. And how quickly you return. No drama. No self-punishment. Just correction. Think of a compass. Not a map. A map shows the whole path. A compass only shows the direction. You still walk the terrain yourself. But you cannot wander forever. Every step checks against north. And over time, that is enough. Set your target clearly enough that it appears in your mind each morning. Not a vague hope. A specific outcome. Something measurable. Something the day can move toward. When the target is visible, decisions simplify. Does this action move me closer? Or not? It sounds almost too obvious. But clarity has a strange power. It multiplies effort. The same energy suddenly produces more result. Because it stops leaking in every direction. Hard work matters. But it is only the engine. Direction is the steering. Without steering, the engine burns fuel and circles the same ground. With steering, distance appears. And when effort and direction begin working together, something else becomes necessary. Measurement. Not perfection. Just honest feedback about whether your actions are actually moving the target closer. Because the mind is very good at telling stories about progress. Numbers are less forgiving. But that comes next. For now, remember this. Effort alone is loud. Direction is quiet. Yet direction decides where the effort goes. And where effort goes long enough, life eventually follows. Chapter 11. The Long Game. Why patience is your greatest weapon. You expected something to happen by now. You've been working, showing up, doing the things people say you're supposed to do. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. And still, the big change hasn't arrived. The results feel smaller than the effort. That thought sits quietly in the back of your mind. Maybe you've wondered if something is wrong. Not with the plan. With you. The world around you moves fast. Headlines about overnight success. People who seem to appear from nowhere and suddenly they're everywhere. A video goes viral. A business explodes. A transformation happens in 30 days. Or so it looks. And after a while your mind starts measuring your own progress against that speed. You look at your work. Your slow, steady progress. And it feels inadequate. Like you're behind. So let me ask you a question most people avoid. How long did you expect this to take? Be honest. When you started the thing that matters to you, how long did you secretly give it? 6 months? A year? Maybe 2? Most people set a timeline without realizing it. An invisible deadline in the mind. If the results don't appear before that deadline, doubt begins. And doubt slowly turns into withdrawal. But here is the problem. Most meaningful work does not respect short timelines. Growth has a different rhythm. Slower, quieter. And from the outside it often looks like nothing is happening. For a long time, there's a plant that grows in a strange way. For the first few years after planting, nothing appears above the soil. You water it. You care for it. Season after season. And still, the ground stays empty. If you didn't know the process, you might think the seed failed. You might stop watering. Move on. Plant something else. But underground something else is happening. Roots spread. A network forms beneath the surface. Patient work you cannot see. Then one year, a shoot breaks through the soil. And within weeks the plant can grow dozens of feet. From the outside it looks sudden. Explosive. But the real work happened long before anyone noticed. Human progress often looks the same. Long periods of invisible preparation. Then a visible shift. People only see the second part. They call it sudden success. They never saw the years underneath. Impatience ruins more progress than failure ever could. Because impatience interrupts the process before it compounds. The mind wants evidence quickly. Proof that the effort is working. When that proof doesn't appear soon enough, people abandon the work. Not because the work failed. Because the timeline was wrong. You change your habits. 2 weeks later the results are small. You start to question the plan. You build something. Months pass. Growth feels slow. You start looking for another idea. You practice a skill. A year goes by. You still feel clumsy. You wonder if maybe you're not built for it. The pattern repeats everywhere. Effort begins. Evidence lags behind. Doubt enters the gap. And most people quit inside that gap. But the gap is not a sign of failure. The gap is the process. Trust the process, especially when the results aren't visible yet. That probably sounds like something people say to comfort themselves. You might even roll your eyes a little. I understand that. Blind optimism helps no one. But patience is not blind. Real patience is informed. It understands how growth actually behaves. Growth compounds. And compounding is slow at the beginning. Tiny increments. Barely visible progress. So small it feels pointless. But each repetition builds on the last. Each day adds something microscopic. Until the accumulation becomes impossible to ignore. The strange part is that compounding only works if you stay long enough. Most people leave before it activates. The people who achieve unusual things are not always more talented. Often they simply stay longer. They hold a longer horizon. While others chase quick evidence, they keep building the structure underneath. They plant. They water. They wait. And they do not dig up the seed every week to check if it's growing. You might be thinking patience sounds passive. Like sitting still and hoping time solves the problem. That's not what this is. The long game is active. Very active. You continue showing up. You keep adjusting. You improve the work. You measure honestly. But you refuse to panic when progress moves slowly. Actually, let me say that more clearly. Patience is not waiting. Patience is continuing. Continuing long enough for effort to accumulate. I remember a small moment that changed how I saw this. Late evening. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of a fan. A notebook sat open on the desk. Pages filled with ideas that had gone nowhere. At least that's what it felt like. Months of work. Little visible result. I leaned back in the chair and stared at the wall. And a strange thought appeared. What if the timeline is wrong? Not the effort. Not the direction. The timeline. What if this takes 5 years? The question felt heavy at first. Then strangely freeing. Because if the timeline stretched far enough, the pressure changed. The work became simpler. Just keep building. The longer your timeline, the larger your results. That's not motivational language. It's mathematics. Time multiplies effort. If the effort is consistent, and if the direction stays steady. Most people want results quickly because uncertainty is uncomfortable. They want reassurance. A signal that says you're on the right path. But reassurance is not always available early. Sometimes the only evidence is the work itself. And your willingness to continue. This is where the decision quietly appears. You can chase fast results. Short cycles of effort followed by disappointment. Starting over again and again. Or you can commit to a horizon long enough for compounding to work. You have a choice. Not about how long growth takes. About how long you are willing to stay. Playing the long game changes your decisions. You stop asking what feels rewarding today. You ask what will matter in 10 years. That question filters everything. Small distractions lose their pull. Shiny opportunities lose their urgency. The work that builds slowly becomes more attractive. Because time is on its side. Imagine something for a moment. Take the ambition you carry right now. Whatever it is. Expand the timeline. 10 years. Not 10 frantic years. 10 consistent ones. Showing up. Improving the craft. Refining the work. Adjusting when necessary. But never abandoning the direction. What would that produce? Pause with that thought. Because 10 years of focused effort changes almost anything. The world underestimates patience. Speed gets attention. Patience gets results. The person who stays while others wander eventually owns the ground they stood on. Not through luck. Through duration. There will still be difficult seasons. Moments when progress feels invisible. Times when quitting would feel easier. Those moments are not signs to stop. They are simply part of the rhythm. Roots growing underground. The long game asks something simple. Stay when the results are small. Stay when improvement feels slow. Stay when doubt whispers that maybe this isn't working. Because most breakthroughs happen just after the point where others would have left. And once you accept the long timeline, another shift becomes necessary. You stop measuring success by quick outcomes. You measure something else. Daily standards. The quality of the work. The consistency of the effort. Because those are the only parts you control. The strange thing about patience is that it makes progress calmer. You stop rushing. You stop forcing results before they're ready. You simply keep building the structure underneath. And structures built slowly tend to last. Remember this. The world celebrates sudden success. But sudden success is usually the final chapter of a very long story. A story most people were too impatient to finish. So take the longer view. Stretch your horizon. Keep showing up. Because the work you are doing today might not reveal its value immediately. But time has a way of amplifying consistent effort. Quietly. Relentlessly. Until one day the results appear. And from the outside, it will look like it happened overnight. Chapter 12. Now, there is no other moment. You already know what you should be doing. That's the uncomfortable part. It isn't confusion. It isn't lack of information. The next step is usually obvious. And yet, it sits there. Unstarted. Maybe you told yourself tomorrow. That word has a way of sounding responsible. Tomorrow feels organized. Measured. Thoughtful. Not rushed. But tomorrow has a strange habit. It never actually arrives. It just moves. Quietly. From one day to the next. Think about the things that have been waiting in your mind. Not the small errands. The real ones. The conversation you keep postponing. The work you keep telling yourself you'll begin when things calm down. The idea that returns to you late at night, when the house is quiet. How long has it been there? Months? Years? Maybe longer. Most people carry a list like this. Unfinished beginnings. Plans that never moved past the thinking stage. Not because they were impossible. Because they were delayed. Repeatedly. There is a quiet mechanism behind that delay. It doesn't look like fear at first. It looks like preparation. You tell yourself you're waiting for the right time. Better conditions. More certainty. The moment when starting will feel easier. Reasonable thoughts. Responsible thoughts. But underneath those thoughts sits a different pattern. Avoidance disguised as patience. Your mind protects you from discomfort. Starting something real creates friction. Uncertainty. Exposure. So the brain offers a simple escape. Later. Tomorrow. Next month. When things settle down. The relief feels immediate. Because delay removes the pressure. At least temporarily. But here is the truth most people avoid. Every delay quietly reshapes your life. Not dramatically. Subtly. Days accumulate. Opportunities shift. Momentum disappears before it even begins. And the list of things you plan to start slowly becomes a museum of intentions. That probably sounds harsh. You might disagree with it. But watch closely. Think about the last time you postponed something important. How many times did that later move forward? Once? Or again and again? Until the urgency faded. There is a sentence people repeat without thinking. I'll start when the time is right. But the right time rarely announces itself. It doesn't arrive with certainty, or confidence, or perfect conditions. The right time almost always looks inconvenient, messy, uncertain. And that's exactly why people miss it. Because they expect readiness to appear first. But readiness is usually the result of action, not the cause of it. You might feel something strange when you hear that. A quiet resistance. Part of your mind still negotiating. Still looking for the moment when everything feels aligned. But that moment doesn't exist. Not for real work. Not for real change. The only moment that ever exists is this one. Not tomorrow. Not next week. Always now. This sounds obvious when spoken out loud. Almost too simple. But most people live as if the real moment is somewhere else. In the future. They organize their ambitions around a time that has not happened yet. A future version of themselves who will be braver, more disciplined, better prepared. But that version never appears. Because the future is built by the person acting now. Let me pause on something small. A detail most people overlook. I once watched someone sit at a desk for nearly an hour. A blank page open in front of them. They adjusted the chair, checked their phone, opened another tab, closed it again, looked out the window. Nothing dramatic, just quiet avoidance. Then finally they placed their hands on the keyboard and wrote the first sentence. It took 10 seconds. 10 seconds after an hour of hesitation. And the strange part was this. Once the first sentence appeared, the rest followed easily. The real barrier had never been ability. It was the moment of beginning. Starting carries a strange weight. The mind treats it like a cliff. But once you step forward, the ground is usually solid. Still uncertain, but solid. People often think urgency means panic. Rushing. Making reckless choices. That's not what urgency really is. Real urgency is clarity. The clear understanding that time is limited. And that delay has a cost. Every day spent waiting is a day removed from what you could have built. You might hear that and feel pressure. But that isn't the intention. This is not about fear. It's about honesty. Life moves forward whether you act or not. The calendar does not pause while you decide. When people reach the later years of their lives, their regrets follow a pattern. They rarely regret the attempts that failed. Those become stories, lessons, sometimes even sources of pride. The deeper regret comes from something else. The attempts that never began. The risks that remained theoretical. The words that stayed unspoken. Not because they lacked ability, because they waited. The cost of waiting is a version of your life you never got to live. That line is uncomfortable, but it's also accurate. Every path you postpone eventually closes. Not dramatically, just quietly. Circumstances shift. The moment passes. But here is the part that matters. You are not trapped by your past delays. You are only limited by your next decision. Because every direction in your life begins the same way. With a single action taken in the present. Not a grand transformation. Just a start. You don't need perfect conditions. You don't need full confidence. You don't even need clarity about every step ahead. You only need the willingness to begin. That's the key. Actually, let me say that differently. Beginning is the only action that turns intention into reality. Everything else is preparation or avoidance. Sometimes it's hard to tell the difference. Right now, somewhere in your mind, there is a task you know you've been postponing. Something small enough to start today, but meaningful enough that starting it matters. You know what it is. You felt it while listening to this. The mind always recognizes its unfinished work. You have a choice. Continue delaying it, or move toward it now. Not tomorrow. Not after one more day of thinking. The first action will probably feel uncomfortable. That's normal. Beginning always does. But once movement starts, something interesting happens. Momentum replaces hesitation. Action creates clarity. The fog lifts as you move, not before. It's not about the feeling. It's about the decision. Feelings fluctuate. Motivation rises and falls. But decisions shape direction. And direction shapes a life. So the question becomes very simple. What happens in the next few minutes? Do you close this chapter and return to the same pattern of delay? Or do you act on the thing you've been avoiding? Quietly. Immediately. Without drama. Because the moment you decide, truly decide, everything shifts. Not magically, but structurally. Your life moves from intention to action. From thinking to building. From waiting to beginning. And beginning is all that has ever been required. Not perfection. Not certainty. Just movement. Because there is no other moment. You've heard everything you need to hear. Now let's make it count. You are not limited by your past. You are not defined by your fears. You are not trapped by your circumstances. You are defined entirely by your decisions, and you make a new one right now. Stop waiting for permission. Stop waiting for the perfect moment. Stop shrinking to fit spaces that were never built for you. Stop giving your attention to things that steal your life without returning a single thing of value. Discipline over motivation. Direction over effort. Identity over behavior. Long game over quick fix. Action over intention. You have the blueprint. You have the tools. You have, right now in this moment, everything required to begin. So here is your challenge. Not tomorrow. Not after the next episode. Identify the one thing, the single most important action you have been postponing, and do it before this day is over. One action. Taken now. That is how it starts. That is always how it starts. You are not almost unstoppable. You are not eventually unstoppable. You are unstoppable the moment you decide to be. Make that decision. Right now. Let's go. Take a moment and be honest with yourself. Not about what you want someday, but about what you are choosing today. Every chapter comes down to one truth. Your life is shaped by the decisions you make when no one is watching. Comfort or growth. Excuses or action. Waiting or beginning. The person you become is not decided by luck. It is decided by the choices you repeat every day. So ask yourself one simple question. Will you keep waiting, or will you finally start now? Take a moment and be honest with yourself. Not about what you want someday, but about what you are choosing today. Every chapter comes down to one truth. Your life is shaped by the decisions you make when no one is watching. Comfort or growth. Excuses or action. Waiting or beginning. The person you become is not decided by luck. It is decided by the choices you repeat every day. So ask yourself one simple question. Will you keep waiting, or will you finally start now?